Hello everyone and welcome to Agulhas Current Affairs, a marine science podcast set in Southern Africa with me as one of your hosts, Dr. Yanis Kirsten of Kikoscopy Media, alongside
Dr. Nelson Miranda of Argonaut Science. What are we doing today? What are we talking about today?
That is a good question, Nelson. What do you think we're talking about today?
It's some sort of, six-step, a magical recipe for life.
Exactly.
You know, how to deal with life, problem solving.
You wouldn't believe how simple these 6 steps are, but they solve so much. Life hacks, Nelson.
That's right. You gotta stay tuned to what we're talking about, and your life will just get better and better and better.
It will improve slowly over time, and you'll become more enlightened. You'll get further to the truth.
Well, you know, speaking of light, I think let's throw you into a bit of a scenario. You know,
interesting.
I think, it won't be a surprising scenario. Don't worry. This is something you've had to deal with before, I'm sure, and I'm sure a lot of people have to deal with this, especially in South Africa. So, okay, you are where you are, you know, in the place where you're at. Beautiful office space, you know, looking around the room.
So exactly what we're doing right now.
And then you are right where you are right now, but suddenly, everything goes dark.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh, it's happening.
It's happening right now.
Yanis is in the dark.
I am.
It's in the dark. Okay, so you're in the dark.
I am in the dark, okay.
And
what is happening?
everything is off. Everything is off. If you look around you, what you observe is that everything that was on, all the sources of light, have gone dark. What happens next? What would you do next?
Probably, being a South African, I'm going to check my good old cellular phone app to see whether it's load shedding, whether there's rolling blackouts. What do I see now?
So in your mind, very quickly, you saw what was happening, and you asked yourself, "What is going on here? Isn't it
happening?"
Yeah, you know?
I observed that
why
I can't
are you checking?
observe because there's no light, and now.
and then you're questioning, why is there no light?
Exactly.
And then obviously thoughts come up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thoughts, previous experiences come up, isn't it? And then you want to, because I mean, you didn't just, what are you doing? You're checking your smartphone, isn't it? Is that your action?
Yeah, that is my action.
You picked up your
That is my
smartphone.
main action.
You only have one action. Sorry, did I mention this? No, this is a game. No, I'm kidding. So you do pick up your phone, and it is working. Okay, so that's interesting. You observe that it is working, and you very precisely, you wanted to do something on your phone, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So we can
what are you doing on your phone
rule
again?
out then there was an electromagnetic pulse. So thankfully there's not a nuclear bomb that just went out nearby. I'm checking my Escom's push app.
Oh, this, by the way, we are not this is not
sponsored in any way.
This is not sponsored content, so the disclaimer is right there.
No, there are maybe other apps.
And
That's
okay,
just what I use.
there are other apps. So, and why? I mean, you very quickly jump to this and you're checking this app. But why are you doing that? What made you think about checking this app?
Because previously, when I observed that the power went out, it could be due to something called load shedding.
Okay, so actually, there's a chance, that maybe that's what's actually happened. Just a load shedding event, isn't it?
Yeah.
That just kicked in, and when there's load shedding, the power, electrical power to your office is cut, and that would explain what's happening. Is it? That's very quickly you thought about this, lightning fast, faster than light. Okay, so you're checking your schedule on the app, and it actually does not show that you are scheduled for load shedding. You look at it, and it says that There's no current load shedding in your area. That's what you see. So now what?
I guess my what I thought it was wrong. So my idea. So I have to rethink this. So maybe I have to think that it might be something else. So I'm probably gonna go check my DB board, my electrical board, see what's going on there.
Okay, interesting. So in your mind, you formulated an alternative reason, isn't it? And now you're checking it. And what do you expect to see when you arrive at your board?
That some switch has tripped, perhaps, which is why the power is off.
Okay, so if one of the switches is tripped and is down, that would explain maybe why there's a park. Okay, you go to your DB board. You are very good at seeing in the dark at this point.
It's been dark for a while.
See all the all the switches. You look at every single switch, and they're all on the on position, so nothing tripped.
This is my worst nightmare.
Oh no! The plot thickens. What next?
Well, one reason could be that I didn't pay my electric bill, especially if I was on a prepaid meter.
Okay.
I remember that I paid it earlier today. Well, not today, but a few days earlier. So there should be electricity.
Okay, so there should be. Okay. So now what you're going to do?
I think the classic next move would be to look out the window at my neighbors to see whether they have power. So I'm going to peer out the window. Yeah.
Right, because you need to understand whether it's something that's happening just to you, and you need like more examples of homes and offices just like yours, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
And you're looking out and you're seeing that if you look out the window, it's also dark. Ooh.
It's dark everywhere.
It's dark everywhere. You don't see a source of electrical light that is on at the moment. And I mean, it is, let's just say that it's already the end of the day, so it would be obvious to you whether or not there'd be a light on or off. Let's just say it's in the evening and it's dark out as well. All right, and let's just say this is a normal day. It's not like suddenly it just became dark everywhere.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's a normal everyday. You probably don't have any reason to think otherwise, but you see that everything is dark. What would be your next move? I think we're close to something here.
In that case, I think it's time to phone the electrical department of the municipality to see whether something's going on there. So.
All right, and then now, so you communicate. You're choosing to use your one call.
Yeah, I'll use my phone friend from the department. Yeah.
All right, so you phone through, and an automated message starts rolling, and it says that there is some maintenance being done in the following areas, and then the area, a list of areas gets thrown at you, and one of those areas is indeed your area.
We have solved the mystery. We have solved the mystery.
You have some sort of confirmation. How does that make you feel?
Sucks, because I don't think anybody notified me.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably a good idea to let other people know, because I did check the app, and no one had any idea.
Yes.
But now I found out. So I think I'll do the good Samaritan thing and let everybody know that there's maintenance in the area.
Okay, you're going to leave a comment just saying, yes, my lights are out and there's maintenance in the area. Okay, so you've published it. Yeah. It's a publication.
Yeah.
And there you go. And then, and indeed, later on, you observe that the light just comes back on. You haven't changed any switches. You haven't, later in the evening, the power comes back on. Okay. And I guess that's the end of the scenario.
Okay.
All right. That was interesting. Well solved. Well solved.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what is the whole point of this?
What's the point of this? Yes, of course. Okay. So what are we talking about? What are these? without even knowing, right? Because this happens in everyday life. We actually go through a number of steps when you try to solve a problem. And it's usually, let's call it 6 steps. And let's see whether or not indeed you went through 6 steps. Because sometimes we do this very, very quickly. And you certainly did that when you acted upon, you reacted almost. You went to probably the most probable source of information, or the most probable test, for what was happening, right? But actually, if you slow it down, action replay, slow down, slow motion, you'll probably find that there was actually, let's go through the steps. There were actually 6 steps. So let's reveal the 6 steps. Step number 1 is observe and question. Let's just put those together for now. And indeed, yes, you can confirm that you observed that something, you were making observations along the way all the time, and you're making questions. Light goes off. Hey, what the hell's happening? All right. And then step number 2 is research. Like you find out information, or you recall information, isn't it? From previous, experience, or you look for a source of information. Right?
So I did that multiple times.
So certainly,
I checked the app, I checked the DB board, I checked out my window. All of that is like research that I was doing.
Yeah. And also you have like memories from previous events. So there's like, and that the electrical supply is connected to the DB board, and there's actually knowledge there, previous knowledge. You know that power cuts happen, and when they do happen, it could be load shedding. So this is all part of research. And then step 3, hypothesis and predictions. Okay, so hypothesis is like a funny word, isn't it? But it really just means that it's a probable. It's like there's a chance that it's a chance that something could be a certain way, isn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of like a prediction that you can make. Like you think that this thing is this way because of that reason.
Like a maybe. It's a maybe. It's like maybe the way the world works is maybe this way, and maybe there's load shedding, or maybe the DB board is off because of some reason, or maybe there's we even mentioned that maybe there would have been like some sort of EMP, right? Electromagnetic pulse that maybe tripped every single electrical system in the area. See, so these are all hypotheses. Like these are things that could have been true, and then we also made some predictions which are related to those hypotheses. And then sometimes there's confusion between what is a hypothesis and what is a prediction. And I think that the way you phrase it, like so for example, with your DB board, you thought maybe it's the DB board. So, maybe the DB board is the cause of the power cut. And so you predict that if that's true, when you arrive at the DB board, you'll observe that, the switches are off. Isn't that so? All right. Step 4, right? Because that's what it is. You have to actually go there. You have to act. Step 4 is test. Experiment, collect information, collect data. Data is just information, fancy word for information, right? So you actually have to act upon this prediction and then just see whether it's true. And you went and you actually acted and told you what happened. Okay, and then when you were acting, right? So you formulated your plan. You say, okay, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go up to the DB board. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to have a look with my amazing night vision eyes. And I'm going to be able. Then you're going to analyze, isn't it? You're going to analyze. You're going to say, okay, button 1 up or down, button 2 up or down. This is like kind of like an analysis, right? And then when you found that all the buttons were in the on position, all the switches were up on the on position, what did that do to your hypothesis, to your little predictions and the world, the little model that you had in your brain?
I had to reject what I thought was happening. So whatever I predicted was incorrect. So I had to reject that prediction and reject that hypothesis.
That's right. And then you moved on, obviously, to formulate, observe some more and formulate that hypothesis. You actually went around in a loop over and over again, and you tested all your different hypotheses to try and find out. And eventually you started to rule things out. And luckily, you kind of like, you thought of what the problem could have been, and then it was supported. But there was also that sixth step. So step 5 was analyze, accept, or reject hypothesis. Final step, sixth step, is to communicate. Communication is super important, isn't it?
So if we,
gotta communicate.
as scientists, your job is to really produce science and use the scientific method to do that. And there's an amount of rigor, and there's a peer review process and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, when you go through the scientific method, it needs to be, whatever you're doing to try and find the truth about something in the natural world, it needs to be repeatable, and you need to show that you did it already. Otherwise, another person's going to do it and kind of like waste their time when they could have been doing something else. Although it is sometimes useful to repeat stuff for replication sense, but you want to show that you did a certain thing and you came to a certain answer, and that information does now exist for this. So when somebody has a different question later on and they need to do their research, they can have a look at what you did, so that can inform whether they would either need to formulate new hypotheses, make new conclusions, or whether they don't need to do the same experiments that you did. So communication of your findings is very important. It's kind of the last step in the scientific method, although when you do that, you usually start the cycle again. So in that process of communicating, when you write out a scientific paper, you also then go back and recontextualize the observations that you made to like find gaps and find new questions. So it's more of a circular thing than like a list of bullet points that you do.
Yeah, but the ability to repeat is super important. You know, I think we need to do more of that. Repeat the same study over and over, because it's all about trying to falsify or disprove, hypothesis. That's how we test it. We don't test it by supporting it and proving it. To say I've proved something, it doesn't give enough room for growth, for continuous growth. And this method, this list is all about incremental, slowly, over and over in a cycle, just growing, getting closer to the truth, getting more information, and actually repeating something is super important, because you might find that actually, in our game we had already like decided what was the cause, and it was all rigged for success. But this method is actually valid for when you don't know at all. That's what science is about. It's not just about knowledge and knowing everything. It's actually about dealing with the unknown, or even sometimes the unknowable, right? Yeah. So it's really important to understand that it's not about falsify, as in it's not like a negative process, as in we need to like try and fight each other and disprove each other. It's not about that, but it's about the hypothesis. So that version of reality that you think, so it's actually not actual reality, it's an idea of reality. In other words, a model. So like in your model, you had the DB board and you saw it in your mind, and in your mind the DB board is either up or down. See, so and that has immediately a falsifiable element to your experiment, isn't it? Yeah. Because if it's down, then it supports, but if it's up, it immediately falsifies, and then it gives you the freedom to try something else.
Yeah. For sure. So it's definitely one of those things where we aren't like, it's not a fight of like who's the most enlightened and who has the most truth. It is more of what what model of the truth is most supported by the data based on how many times we tested it and how many different ways we tested it. And some things are always being refined and always being, because sometimes you might have an answer that fits a lot of what the data is saying. So like it might give you most of an understanding about what is going on, and then somebody comes along and says, but hang on, the way you're actually looking at it, it might fit maybe 50% of what you're seeing, but it doesn't explain this 10%. Like the way if you look at it this way, like it doesn't make sense. If you look at it that way, it makes like 50% sense, but we accepted it because that's a lot. And then you have to go back as a whole community of scientists or a field of science and be like, okay, let's look at it this way, see what's going on here, and find a new model that kind of fits more. So let's get it to like 60%, let's get it to 70%, and then we usually don't ever get past 95% because we use like statistical analyses, and a lot of these statistical analyses have like an error of where right could be, and usually that's like 90%, 95%. I'm 95% confident that something is happening this way. So there's
it's all about confidence.
It's more about confidence than saying like I'm definitely right. It's like more like I'm fairly confident that the data supports this idea of how the world works or what's going on here. So that's a very important thing to think about when it comes to the scientific method. You are trying to find the truth, but you're using this methodology of rigorous testing and evidence and asking questions and keep looking for a better and better solution as time goes on, instead of looking for one solution and be like, that's it, it's over, we don't need to look at this again. Which sometimes does happen, and sometimes it is annoying even within science, but that's not what the whole of science is built around. It's more built on this iterative thing, like you said, of getting better and better over time.
Just incrementally. And I mean, we also trying to keep it practical. You know, a lot of models are practically correct. You know, we can apply them. It depends what job you are doing, what problem you are solving. You could actually use an outdated model and get a solution that works, you know, which is why you have science that is applied science, you know, and then you have science that is pure science as well. You can also look at it fundamentally like that. You know, physics is probably the most classic example, where Newtonian physics, you know, we still learn it and we use it and it works at this scale, you know, in the world, you know, because it's easy to understand, it's easy to apply for a lot of people, it's practical. But quantum, you know, quantum physics, that is, you know, not so easy to understand, maybe not so easy to apply. But it is closer to explaining that, you know, maybe that realm of the beyond the 95% that is closer now to you know how the world works as a whole, you know. And if you're interested in the unknowable, even quantum physics is a very good one for you, because you know there's literally unknowable. So the model of quantum physics, the theories of quantum physics include unknowable, you know, elements, which is very interesting.
And like even in physics, which is one of the most basic kind of, fundamental kinds of sciences that kind of explain life on the most rudimentary level, even though it's difficult to understand because it is very difficult. We don't know everything, and everybody is still looking, and there are debates as to what is going on. String theory being debated, like quantum science, dark energy, dark matter. How do we get to cold fusion? Like, there's still discussions going on, and people just keep doing experiments, keep formulating new hypotheses, keep testing it, so that one day we can come to the answers that solves it all. Well,
we tend towards that day, but that day will probably never arrive. But it's that recipe, those 6 steps, and we just, you know, that's the way we work, you know. And I mean, maybe it's good to think about it that way. It's something that we do in our everyday life. There's an element, there's a fundamental element of that in the way we live our lives and solve problems every day. And in fact, aside from that, 6-step recipe, I like the idea of a recipe. You were talking to me about it earlier.
Yeah.
It's like a recipe, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. The scientific method, which is like the most fundamental thing you can boil down, the idea of science, it's just a recipe. It's a way you go about doing things, finding the truth. So it's like if you want to make a cake, what science is not the cake. It's the cake recipe. Like you doing all the methods that it is to make the cake. That is the scientific method. The cake that you get afterwards is the kind of the new knowledge that you created in the world, and whatever you do with that can change and depend on like what your goals are. Like you said earlier, like there's applied sciences and there's pure scientists. So if you just want to find out the truth, then you cut one piece for that, just like for pure science. And then somebody is going to use part of that truth for their business, and the government is going to use part of that truth for whatever they need to use. And you segment like your final findings in that way. But the cake recipe, the way you get to that doesn't change. And even though if you do it over and over again, the cake will look different and maybe taste different each time.
It may vary. Yeah. Some of the cakes flop, and we're like, why did it flop? We followed the recipe, And that's more closer to the scientific method and the actions, the scientific method, and these 6 steps. Also, who gets to decide what to use the cakes and how to slice it? That becomes political, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and then it becomes confusing. So let's try and not get too confused with the political side of science.
Yeah, that's why I think it's very important to separate the cake from the recipe. Like when you're talking about scientific knowledge, that is the cake, and like what we do with that, that's got more to do with institutions and academia and the government. But the cake recipe is something everybody can use. There's really no debate about it. It's just a way of doing things, a way of doing things and finding your answers like objectively. So like when you think about science, it's a broad term for a lot of things, and one of the most fundamental things is the scientific method. But it is kind of separate from the other parts of science that we think about. When you're talking about it on social media and stuff. But it's very important.
Now, exactly, because science itself is now like a thing in itself. Like it's perceived a certain way, and it has like a persona.
It sounds like its own like institution, like big science. Like there's somebody like heading it.
Oh and what concerns me sometimes is that it makes you think, oh no, I'm not doing science because it's this other thing. And meanwhile, the fundamental principles of the method, that all scientists, if you're a scientist, you use a method. That's basically what being a scientist is.
You're using that method in a formal way, right? That's what makes you a scientist.
That's it.
But everybody's kind of doing it.
As a professional scientist.
But everybody's kind of doing it. Just by existing as a human being, you're using these things. And that's what kind of separates it out,
Now listen to this, because the fundamentals of anything are actually very difficult to talk about. So we usually talk about the idea of the fundamental, but listen to this, and tell me if this doesn't sound familiar. Have you ever heard of Kaizen? Kaizen?
Not before today. No, that's a new term.
Okay, so Kaizen, right? It's a cycle. It's a cycle. And it's called the cycle of continuous improvement. Now listen to these steps. Step 1, identify the problem. So you have to
That's familiar.
Yeah, sounds familiar. Step 2, analyze the current processes. Ooh, analyze the current processes. Yeah. You know, this is just one of the iterations.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the recipes for Kaizen, the cake Kaizen. I don't know, the cake that might.
Well, this is a recipe for
Then
something
create a
else. This is like
solution.
a recipe for like a hot dog, maybe. It's a different recipe.
Yeah, but it's still
food.
It's still a recipe,
Yeah.
and it's still based on the idea of that recipe. You know. Then step 3, create the solution. Okay. Step 4, test the solution. Oh. Step 5, measure and analyze results. And then step 6, standardize the solution. And then it goes back to step 1, identify the problem. Does this not sound familiar to you?
It sounds very, very familiar. It sounds like a scientific method, but phrased differently.
It sounds like the scientific method. And it's like the scientific method. There's this cyclical, sort of pathway, and we're tending towards. Well, in this case, they call it continuous improvement. And in the scientific method, we may say, "Oh, we're tending towards the truth." You know, we're always trying to tend towards the truth. See, it's very similar stuff, isn't it? Interesting. Okay.
So this
How about
is
this other one?
in the context of business. That's what Kaizen is.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, absolutely. And it has its source. I think it's a Japanese term. You know? All right. And then, how about this one? Have you ever heard of the OODA loop? See, since we're talking about loop things.
Yeah. Circular things, okay.
The OODA loop. All right.
Yeah.
So, OODA stands for observe. Okay, we've heard this one before. Then orient, as in, you know, place yourself, get what you need, you know, get your information, you know, place yourself in the right favorable position. Then you decide. Okay, so obviously you're now formulating something in your mind.
You did your analysis, you accepted or rejected.
Yeah. And then you act. And then you go back and you observe.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't it? Very interesting. Again, it's a problem-solving thing. Only 4 steps, easy to remember. OODA, easier to remember. But wouldn't you say that this sounds very, very familiar?
It does sound very familiar. It sounds like a very simplified version of the scientific method. It's like
the scientific method. There it is again. And I believe this one is used by military-minded people and institutions, and I guess it's a very they're trying to make it very streamlined and straightforward.
Yeah, so it does sound like more of a decision-making type of thing. So it's just like generally, if you want to make a decision or like find the truth, you generally follow the same set of principles. Right, you might phrase it differently depending on the context, but you kind of go through the same like 6 steps. You won't believe.
Or maybe there are 9 steps. Maybe there are 9 steps, because if you look at the marine sciences curriculum of South Africa, and if you look at the scientific method, step 1 would be observe. Oh, there it is again. You know. Observe, use all the senses. Then step 2 would be question. Right? So you've observed and you question based on your observations. And then step 3, hypothesize. So that you come up with a tentative explanation about a possible cause or dynamics of what you've observed, that phenomenon, right? And then step 4, right? You design an experiment to test the hypothesis. So obviously the hypothesis has to be, testable. Has to be falsifiable, etc. Right? And then step 5, you act, you perform that experiment. Right? Step 6, you record the results. Step 7, you analyze and you explain the results. Step 8, you draw conclusions. And then step 9, you produce a research report, so communication. You see, so again, there's that recipe, and you were telling me about someone that had some issue with the scientific method. The scientific method is it's not let's criticize it. Is it really structured
for sure,
correctly?
For
so
sure. It's
tell me a little bit about that.
Definitely it is. Well, the main problem that he had, it's a TED talk that I watched, and it was titled like "Why the Scientific Method Sucks," and it basically boils down to like, even though we were saying that it's a circular thing, because that's how it kind of works in practice, but that isn't really built into the scientific method, because usually it ends at communicate, right? So
yeah, and you're talking specifically about the professional scientific methods recipe that we are trained to execute, as professional scientists. So there's a very specific context there.
So like, like what you said for CAPS now, that's when you're teaching new and future scientists, and you gotta have more steps. Like it's easier to understand. You break it up more, so that's why like it's nicer. Even though like in our 6 steps, it does like some of those steps are just a lot of the other steps like put together, because like we were talking more of like a principle side versus like a step-by-step side. And even those 9 steps, you can break it up even further, because when it comes to like a hypothesis, like when you talk about science, like you also want to have an aim and an objective and all of those things, and all of those things also get added on top of. So each of those layers has different things you can do. Like when you talk about observation, like observing would not only be like what you see, but also like what you hear versus what other people hear. Like, and when you're talking about like research, it's not only like what's written down in papers. It could be something that you Googled. It could be people that you talk to. So like there's so many steps within the steps. So coming down to like the basic principles, and like basic principles, I think was 3. And I think the first one was like the observation, ask a question. The next one was like model, and the last one was kind of like predict. And there were like substeps in there that we were talking about in our, sub-steps that we were talking about in our thing. But in his one, he was just like, we need to make it more circular. We need to account for the fact that it's more of a it's more of a model than a hypothesis. This is what we think the truth is, and it can change, and it doesn't need to be the same. Like if it's super wrong, then we reject it entirely. But sometimes it could be partially wrong, in which case we just need to change the model, and then reiterate. And it's not a fixed thing. You keep going in a cycle to get the model better and better over time. So that was his main gripe.
So it sounds to me like it's just that it's not that he had a problem with the scientific method as a principle. The problem seems to be how we phrase it, how we structure it in terms of that 6 steps or 3 steps or 4 steps, and what each step is exactly, and to just make sure that certain parts of that fundamental thing, like the cyclical nature, is better represented. So it's not a problem with the fundamental thing. It's a problem in our perception or our use. How do we actually put it into reality?
Definitely. What like in reality what you're doing as a scientist, and like what you said as well, like the way the scientific method is written up, like it doesn't really like account for that you should be repeating the experiment like multiple times under like different conditions. But like we know as scientists, like that doesn't usually happen a lot. Why? Because of like funding. Like usually like when you already have an answer that doesn't get funded, because you kind of quote unquote have an answer, even though that could be an outdated model that you would need more data for. So that's also part of the issue, is that it's the final hypothesis that you either reject or accept. That's not the final answer. We don't treat it that way in science, because science is always changing. There might be a more correct answer, so that's why he wants to model it as he wants to change it to a model of the truth. So definitely, it does come down to like wording and what your idea of is, and like how practical it is for what you are and how truthful it is for what you're doing. So wording is an important thing, but I think we at this point we digress because we've covered a lot and everything.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, and I hope that this is helpful. Mostly in, I mean, we covered a little bit about what professional scientists even perceive as well. But I think most importantly, it's like that fundamental, the underlying source of this, this thing that we happen to be calling today the scientific method, but you could call it the OODA loop, I suspect, or the Kaizen, approach, I suspect.
Yeah.
But, I think we use it in our everyday lives, and it's really fun to realize that.
Yeah.
And I hope to talk to you more about how you use let's call it the scientific method in your everyday life, because it's a lot of fun, and maybe even other people. Let's make this a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
That we come back
I think on the next episode, maybe, or at least an episode in the future, we'll come back with some examples of how you use the scientific method in your everyday life. We gave you one example with the power outage, but me and Nelson will have a few more for you that might be entertaining. And it also might be something interesting to ask guests when we have on, like, what's an example that you use the scientific method on that's not related to your research, which I think is...
absolutely, because, I think that, coming up with different scenarios will also help more of us to look at this. Is it true? Is it true that we use a scientific method? Is it true that we may be using some form of these steps? Yeah. Isn't it?
I guess we gotta take some data.
It might be fun.
Yeah,
let's go for it.
Gotta run an experiment, I suppose. Definitely. So other than that, I think we'll do that at some point. But until then, you can catch, if you're looking for us, and you can let us know how you use the scientific method in your everyday lives at Agulhas Current on Twitter, Agulhas Current Affairs on other social media, at Geekoscopy for my stuff, and you, Nelson.
And at Argonaut Science.
Definitely. So
good old octopus.
Definitely do let us know how you would use the scientific method and whether we made it a little bit easier for you to understand. Other than that, thanks for joining, and cheers.
Cheers.